we have till the Yom, Yadim, Yadayim, and we are on Aleph Dalet. If one rinse utensils in the water, or if you scrub your measures with the water, it is invalid. However, if you rinsed it in the water, utensils that were already rinsed in that were new, the water is valid. Rabbi Yossi validates the water in the case of new utensils. The water into which the baker dips the rolls is invalid, but if he rinses his hands in it, it's invalid. Everyone is qualified to pour water on hands, even a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor. And one may place a barrel between his knees and wash his hands from it. One may turn the barrel on its side and wash his hands from it, and an ape may pour water over his hands. And Rabbi Yossi invalidates the Natila in these last two cases. If one washed one hand with a single rinse, his hand is tahor. But as regards two hands with a single rinse, Rabbi Meir moves them tameh until he washes them with a revius of water. If a loaf of truma fell into the water, it is tahor, and Rabbi Yossi rules it tameh. Okay.
Yeah, Mishnah Beis. Natal is harishonim lemakom echad, v'sashnim lemakom acher. So theoretically, this is just it's a hypothetical case. Don't even ask why somebody would do this, but let's say they did, and it's here to prove a point. Okay. Natal is harishonim lemakom echad. So he poured the first waters over his hand, and they spilled into one let's say into one bowl. Okay, and the second waters went over into another bowl. Nafal kikar shel truma al harishonim tamei al hashniim tahor. So the truma becomes pasul from the first set of waters, but not from the second set, because the first set is what's taking away the truma, and the second set is what's washing away the first waters. And this, by the way, contrasts with what we said in the previous thing. In Natal, we look at Mishnah Aleph, where it says Natal yado achas mishtifa achas. So he washed both his hands in one big wash. Then his hands are tahor. Wait, oh sorry, I beg your pardon. That's the oh yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. That is what I'm going to carry on and say. Okay, l'shtei yadav mishtifa achas. Okay. Nonetheless, it says at the end of this thing that nafal kikar shel truma, it's tahor. The overwhelming view over there is that the first loaf is tahor in this case. Okay, why? Because the water themselves the water. I get confused between the plural in the Hebrew and the water itself is tahor like the hands. What's different in this case, where we wash the first waters first, okay, it's tameh, because because in the second Mishnah, he just did the second waters. That's tameh misakikar, okay, because it just contains the first waters. Okay, now will it get more confusing over here? Let's just read on. Okay, Natal is harishonim ve'es hashniim lemakom echad. If you put the first waters and the second waters in one place, for nafal kikar shel truma tameh. If you washed both the first waters and the second waters into one place, that is tameh again, because the second waters aren't metaher the first waters. So what's the difference between this case and Mishnah Aleph? Okay. So he did one big wash in the first one. Okay, and I think it really should be spelled out a little bit more clearly in my commentary, which I don't see. But what we're talking about, I think, in the first Mishnah is when there's more than a full revius going over his hands. Once it's more than a full revius going over his hands, the water remains tahor. What we're talking about in the second Mishnah is where he only had like a revius to start with, and he just did a little wash on each hand. So the water, so with less than a revius, the water does not become purified. It takes off the tumah, but it itself becomes tameh, and that's why you need the second waters. So technically, what you could do with Netilas Yadayim is if you just take one big cup and you just do one big rinse of your hands in one shot, that would be perfectly good by itself. The fact that we do two washes on our hands when you do Netilas Yadayim is in case you didn't get a revius in the first wash. Then the second wash comes to take away the second one. And remember, revius is not a heck of a lot. It's like a kiddush cup full.
Right. So,
Okay. So so that I think that is the difference here between Mishnah Aleph and Mishnah Base is whether it's a full revius or not that's going onto your hands.
most of the washing cups anyway are more than a Revius.
Oh yes, that's right. Very
Well,
much.
yeah,
They're about a liter.
right.
The revius is like approximately 100 mils. I mean, yeah, depending whether you're talking Chazon Ish, Avram Chaim Naeh, but your
Right.
consensus would be around 100 mils. Um, and your natla is typically about a liter.
Mhm. Yeah. Right.
Okay. All right. Carrying on. And Natal es Harishonim, if he took the first, he did the first water on one hand, but Nimtza al Yadav, sorry, he did the first water on his hands. But Nimtza al Yadav kesam otzror. He finds a stick, a splinter, or a bit of a bit of sand or something, and then Yadav Tmeos. Okay, the second he cannot at this point like knock off the splinter or whatever the chatzitza is and do the second waters because the first waters on his hand are already tameh.
Right.
And now the second waters can't help him because
Right.
it's supposed to be matahar his hands and the water, which is just not going to work. She'ein hamayim ha'achronim matarim ela hamayim she'al gabei hayad. The second waters can only be matahar the first water that's on his hands, not the hands themselves if they're already wet. So if in such a case, he would actually have to dry his hands and start again. Okay. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Kol Shehu Mibrias Hamayim Tahor. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that like let's say there's some water creature that was in the water that he was washing his hands with, like he scooped it out the river and found, oh look, there's a little water worm or something on my hand. He says that's not considered a chatzitza, but he's a minority opinion.
That's interesting. Right.
Okay, Mishnah Gimel Hayadayim mitamos umitaros ad aperik. So the water uh, affects your hands both for tuma and for tara until the wrist. Okay, how so? Let's see some practical examples. Natalis harishonim ad aperik. So he poured the first water up to his wrist, but no further than his wrist. Et hashniyim chutz laperik. The second water he put more so that it splashed also onto his wrist. And then the water returns to his hand. Chazru leyad. Tahora. The second water is tahor because it cleaned off the first waters that were on his hand. Okay, but and didn't and what's outside his wrist is not part of the getter of hands. That's either tame or tahor. It's just nothing happened over there. Natalis harishonim ve'es hashnim lechutz laperek. So let's say he took the first waters, and again we're talking about less than a revius over here. So he washed, and then the water crept back down under his wrist, onto his forearm, and then he tilted his arm downwards so that the water ran down back onto his hand again. Now that water was tameh, and even if the second waters went down onto the wrist and covered the first waters, they have no power to be matar the water that's on his arm, only what's on his hand.
Mm.
So that water remains tame on his wrist, and if he turns his hand back down so that it drips back down onto his hand, then it will be matame his hand. So a good practice, and you'll see a lot of people do that, is after you've done Netilas Yadayim, people hold their hands upright, right?
Right.
So that the water drips downwards and they don't turn their hands back down again. Okay, again, this is only for protection in case you put less than a revius the first time you washed. But it's a good habit because if you ever are in that situation, you'll remember to keep your hands upright to
My
stop the
wife
water.
does that all the time. That's how she washes all the time.
The hands
When
up.
she washes, she puts her hands up. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
correct. It's a good habit. Okay. Natal es harishonim ve'es hashnim chutz leperek v'chazar liyad tmeya. Okay. Natal es harishonim liyado achas. Now, what happens if he first washes once on his left hand, let's say? Nimtza Nimlach v'natal es hashniim l'shtei yadav. And now he decides that he wants to do both his hands in one splash. Okay, now this is not going to work because the as soon as if he puts his hands together, then immediately the water from his left hand is going to touch his right hand, and that's going to be tame.
Right.
Okay, so that's not a good idea. Tame. Natal is harishonim l'shtei yadav. If we put the first waters on both hands, v'nimlach v'natal es hashniim liyadu achas, and he decides that he's instead of after having washed both hands together for the first wash, he now takes the water and puts it just on one hand. So that one hand is tahor. Okay. Natal liyadu achas v'shiv shafa bechaverta. If he put just on one hand and he rubbed it on the other hand, that of course becomes tame. But Barosh of a kotel, however, if he rubs it on his head or on the wall, that's tahor because the head and the wall are not tame.
Mhm.
So there's no. And by the way, we're talking about if he did a kosher washing on his left hand and then he touched it with his right hand, that was still tame. Then his left hand also becomes tame. So it's not. So you'd have to start again, and with drying his hands. Okay. Notlin arba v'chamisha zeh b'tzad zeh. If you take five or six, you can 4 or 5 people, all like with their hands next to each other, or zeh al gabe zeh, or one on top of the other even. B'vat she'yirapu she'yavu b'hem hamayim. So you can have the same water pouring on 4 or 5 people's different hands, from one splash, as long as their hands are loose and not like stopping the water from flowing. So it's all considered one splash from the kli, and that is mitzahar everyone's hands. And the reason we can do this, by the way, of course, the whole inyan of Natilas Yadayim is drabanan.
Right.
Minatora, if you're there's no separation between your hands and your body. Chazal were the ones who paskin this tumashnia on the hands. So all of the rules here don't have to make sense. They just have to. I mean, not that the Torah rules even have to make sense, but Chazal can paskin whatever kind of logic they want, to be matar the hands because they're the ones who paskin the tumah.
Right.
So they write the rules.
Right.
So I mean, normally you wouldn't allow like uh, you would think that the first hands made the water tame, and as soon as it drips into the second hands, it's going to be tame. But Chazal said no, that's not how it works in this case. Okay. Mishnah Dalet, Safek Naaseh Bahem Melacha. Okay, so now we also know that we've learned before that the water for Natilas Yadayim cannot have had melacha done with it. It has to be clean, unused water, for washing hands. So now if there's any kind of safek, if melacha was done with them or not, and just by the way, there's a saying safek yadayim lahakel. Any kind of safek with hands, we go leniently. So we're not sure whether there was melacha done with him or not. Safek yesh b'hem kashir, safek she'en b'hem kashir. We're not sure. He did Natilas Yadayim, and we're not sure if there was a shear of the correct shear inside there. That's considered another safek. Safek tmeim, safek tahorin, tzveikan tahor. In all these cases, the safek is tahor. Mipnei shamru sfeika yadayim litame uletame litaher tahor. In all cases of hands, any safek comes out tahor. Rabbi Yossi Omer litaher tamei. No, he says he disagrees with the Tanna Kamma and says no. If the chazaka is that they were already tamei, then a safek cannot remove them from the chazaka of tuma. Says Rabbi Yossi Haso hayu yadav tahoros. If his hands were tahor and in front of him are two hang on, is this Ketzad Rabbi Yossi or is it general? We'll see if it's Rabbi Yossi or not. Okay, so he has some practical examples. His hands were tahor and there were two tamei loaves. Safek naga, safek lo naga, and he's not sure if he touched or not. Okay, that's a safek to become tamei, it's tahor. Hayu yadav tameos. If his hands were tamei, v'lefanav shnei kikarim tahorim. So this is not Rabbi Yossi. Okay, if if his hands were tamei and there were two tahor loaves of truma, safek naga, so safek lo naga. He's not sure if he touched or not. It's tahor. Hayu yadav achas tamei achas tahora. He had one hand that was tahor and one hand that was tamei. Ulefanav shnei kikarim tahorim, and there were two tahor loaves in front of him. Naga be'echad mehem v'safek b'tmeas safek naga b'tahora. He's not sure which hand he touched them with. Okay, again, safek lahakel. Hayu yadav tahora ulefanav shnei kikarim. His hands were tahor, and there were two tame loaves in front, or two loaves in front of him. One was tame and one was tahor, and he touched one of them. Safek b'tame, safek b'tahor. He's not sure which one. Again, lahakel. Hayu yadav achas tamei v'achas tahor. One of his hands was tamei, one was tahor. V'lifnav shnei kikarim. One was tamei and one was tahor. Echad tamei v'echad tahor. Naga b'shteihen, and he touched both of them. Safek tamei v'tamei, or tahor v'tahor, or tahor v'tamei v'tamei v'tahor. He's not sure whether he switched his hands over or not. Hayadayim k'moshe hayu v'kikarim k'moshe hayu. Then the hands remain tahor and the kikaros remain tahor, because all of these are considered safek yadayim lahakel. Okay, and these examples were not according to Rabbi Yossi. According to Rabbi Yossi, any case where his hands started out tameh, then we cannot be lenient with the safek. Okay, back to Tvul Yom.
Okay, Dalit. If a porridge and flat cake were made of chulin and oil of truma was floating on top of them, and a tevel yom touched the oil, he is rendered puzzle only the oil. But if he stirred it wherever the oil flowed, is rendered puzzle. Regarding sanctified meat upon which a layer of sediment congealed, if the tevel yom touched the sediment, the pieces of meat are permitted, and if he touched the piece of everything that comes up with it are connected to one another. Yochanan ben Nuri says both of them are connected to one another, and the water, and the same applies to legumes of which a layer congealed on top of slices of bread. Legumes prepared in a pot, when the legumes are separate, it is not considered a connection when they are formed a mass. It is considered a connection. If there were many masses, they were counted. If oil was floating on top of wine and tevel yom touched the oil, he has rendered puzzle only the oil. Yochanan ben Nuri says both of them are connected to each other. If a barrel sank into a pit containing wine and a tevel yom touched it, if he touched it from the rim of the barrel and inward, it is considered a connection. If he touched it from the rim of the barrel and outward, it is not connected. If Yochanan ben Nuri says even if the level of some wine in the pit above the barrel is equal to the height of a person, and he touched the wine directly above the mouth of the barrel, it is considered a connection. Okay.
Okay. Machshirim of hay.
Okay, hey. If one pressed on a leak or squeezed water from his hair with his garment, Rabbi Yossi says, what emerges is included in the law of water is placed, and what remains is not included in the law of water is placed, because he intends all of it should emerge. If one blew on lentils to ascertain whether they are good quality, Rabbi Shimon says they are not included in the law of water is placed, but the comments say if they are included in the law of water is placed. And if one ate sesame seeds with his finger concerning the liquid on his hand, Rabbi Shimon says they are not included in the law of water is placed, but the comment says they are included in the law of water is placed. If one hid his fruits in water because of thieves, the fruits are not included in the law of water is placed. There was an incident with the people of Yerushalayim who hid their pressed figs in water because of the extortionists, and the rabbis ruled that they were tahor. If one places fruits in the rapids of a river in order to bring them with him, they are not included in the law of water is placed. Regarding the perspiration of houses, cisterns, ditches, and caves, it is tahor. Regarding the perspiration of humans, it is tahor. If one drank tamei water and perspired, his perspiration is tahor. If one did enjoy water and then perspired, his perspiration is tamei. If he dried himself and then prepared his perspiration, if he dried himself and then perspired, his perspiration is tahor. Okay. Well, okay. All right. Gimel. A jug of katos ash that touched the sheretz is tahor. If he placed it on top of it, Rebbe Eliezer declares it tahor, and the sages declare it tamei. If he touched foodstuffs and drinks or holy scriptures, it is tahor. If he placed it on top of them, Rebbe Eliezer declares it tahor, and the sages declare it tamei. A person who is tahor in regard to make katos who touch an oven, if he touched it with his hand, if he is tamei, he is tamei. If he touched it with his foot, he is tahor. If he was standing on top of the oven and touched his hand outside the airspace of the oven with a flask in it, and similarly, if a pole was placed on top of the oven and on it are two jugs, one on this side, one on that side, Rabbi Kiva declares the contents of the flask and jug tahor, and sages declare the contents of the flask and jug tamei. If he was standing outside the airspace of an oven and he stretched his hands through a window, took a flask, passed it on over the top of the oven, Rabbi Akiva declares it tame, and the sages declare it tahor. But this person who is tahor for katos may stand on top of the oven with an empty utensil that is tahor for katos in his hand, and with a utensil filled with water that is not sanctified. Okay. And we are on to recess. Replied Rabbi Akiva to him, your words are acceptable in the case of a small me'ilah, but what is he if he is guilty of a doubtful case of me'ilah of 100 mana? It is not better for him that he should bring an asham than 2 selim and not bring a doubtful restitution of 100 mana. Rabbi Akiva again agrees with the Tafin in the case of a small milah. If a woman brought a bird katos of doubt, if he became known to her before the neck was nipped that she had definitely given birth, she must make it an unconditional katas from the same species from which she brings her an obligation of doubt, she brings her an obligation of certainty. If there was a piece of ordinary meat and a piece of sanctified meat, if one ate of one of them, and it is not known which one of them he ate, he's exempt. The Makiva holds him liable to the Asham Tuli. If he ate the second piece, he must bring an unconditional Asham. If one person ate the first piece and another person ate the second piece, this one must bring an Asham Tuli, and he must bring an Asham Tuli. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon says they both bring one Asham, and Rabbi Yossi says 2 of them do not bring one. If there was a piece of ordinary meat and a piece of caliph, if he ate one of them and is not known which one of them he ate, he must bring an asham tuli. If he ate the second piece, he must bring a katos. If one person ate the first piece, another came and ate the second piece, the one must bring an asham tuli. This one must bring an asham tuli, and that one must bring an asham tuli. The Reb Shimon says they both bring one katos. And Reb Yoshi says 2 do not bring one katos.
Okay.
And
Come on.
Okay. Base. If according to 2 witnesses a person stole, and according to them or according to 2 others he slaughtered or sold or pays the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. If one stole and one sold on the Sabbath, stole and sold for idolatry, sold and slaughtered on Yom Kippur, stole from its father, slaughtered or sold it, and then his father died, or stole and slaughtered and then consecrated, he pays the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. If one sold and slaughtered for medicinal purposes or for dogs, if one slaughters and it is found to have an organic defect, or if one slaughters an ordinary animal in the temple courtyard, he pays the 4-fold, 5-fold payment, and Reb Shimon exempts him in these 2 instances. If according to 2 witnesses a person stole, and according to them he slaughtered or sold, and they are found to be false witnesses, they pay in full. If according to 2 witnesses he stole, and according to 2 others he slaughtered or sold, or both of them were found to be false witnesses, the first one pays a 2-fold payment, the second one must pay the 3-fold payment. If the second one was found to be false witnesses, he says he pays the 2-fold payment and they pay the 3-fold payment. If one of the second ones is found to be false, the second testimony is void. If one of the first one is found to be false, the entire testimony is void, for if there is no theft, there is no slaughter and no sale. If according to 2 witnesses one stole, and according to 1 witness by his own confession he slaughtered or sold, he pays the 2-fold payment, but he does not pay the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. If one sold and slaughtered on the Sabbath, slaughtered for idolatry, stole from his father, and his father died, and afterward he slaughtered or sold, stole or consecrated, and afterwards slaughtered or sold, he pays the 2-fold payment, but he does not pay the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. Reb Shimon says for consecrated animals for which he is responsible, he pays the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. For those for which he is not responsible, he is exempt.
Okay. And Erevin.
Okay, Dalit. If one places his Erev in a gatehouse, a colonnade, or a gallery, the Erev is not valid, and one who lives there does not restrict it. In a silo, barn, woodshed, or wood storehouse, the Erev is valid, and one who lives there restricts it. Rabbi Yehuda says if the owner retains a holding there, he does not restrict him. One who left his house and went to spend the Sabbath in another town, whether a Gentile or Jew, restricts. These are the words of Rav Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says he does not restrict him. Rabbi Yossi says the Gentile restricts, the Jew does not restrict, for it is unusual for a Jew to return on the Sabbath. And Shimon says even one who left his house and went to spend the Sabbath in his daughter's house in the same town does not restrict, for he has already dismissed any thought of returning from his mind. If a cistern is between 2 courtyards, we may not draw water from it on the Sabbath, unless they made a partition for it 10 tefachim high, whether above or below or within its walls. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Bet Shammai said below, Yisrael says above. Rabbi Yehuda says a partition should not be more effective than a wall that is between them.
Okay, we are done.